"I'm shy. It's my first night in 10 years," the giant widow whispered to the rich rancher. He said, "It's my first time too." The giant widow stood trembling in the lamplight of the richest rancher's bedroom, her 6'3" frame casting shadows across the quilted bed she'd dreaded all evening. "I'm shy," Lavinia Blackwood whispered, her voice breaking as she twisted her wedding ring. "It's my first night in 10 years. The words hung between them like a confession. 10 years since her brutal first husband had touched her. 10 years of believing her towering body was a curse no man could desire. But Dalton Ashford, the cattle baron who'd paid her passage from Missouri, stepped closer with tears in his storm-gray eyes and said something that shattered every wall she'd built. "It's my first time, too. A 41-year-old virgin rancher, a widow who'd forgotten what gentleness felt like. Two broken souls on their wedding night, both terrified of the same thing." But what dark secret made Dalton wait 4 decades? And what happened in those 10 years that made Lavinia believe she was unworthy of love? 6 hours earlier, Lavinia had stood in that same bedroom, adjusting her wedding dress with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The ivory fabric strained across her broad shoulders, and she'd spent an hour trying to make herself smaller, cinching the corset until her ribs screamed. Through the window, she could see the Wyoming plains stretching forever under a September sky, golden and endless, and for a moment she felt like she could breathe. Then, Cordelia Ashford's voice sliced through the door. "Are you certain about this, brother? She's so large." Lavinia's chest tightened. She pressed her palm against the cool glass and closed her eyes. This was her last chance. The homestead in Missouri was gone, swallowed by debt after Josiah died in that mine collapse 3 years ago. She'd answered Dalton's advertisement because she had nowhere else to go. No one left who'd take a woman like her. But his letters had been different. Kind. He'd written about the ranch, about the mountains, about how lonely the nights were when you built something beautiful with no one to share it with. He'd never once asked about her appearance. Only her heart. Still, when she'd stepped off the stagecoach 3 days ago and he'd looked up at her, really looked at her full height, she'd seen it. That flicker. The same flicker every man had when they realized she wasn't normal. Except Dalton hadn't turned away. He'd smiled, slow and genuine, and said, "You're even more beautiful than your words." Now, walking down the stairs toward Reverend Hoskins, Lavinia felt like she was walking toward either salvation or another kind of prison. The parlor was packed with ranch hands and neighbors, all of them staring. She could feel their judgment like heat from a branding iron. Dalton stood at the front near the stone fireplace, dressed in black with a silver bolo tie, his dark hair slicked back, his jaw tight with something she couldn't name. When their eyes met, he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Reverend Hoskins opened his Bible and began, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here." But Lavinia barely heard him. All she could hear was her own heartbeat and Cordelia's whisper behind her, "Poor Dalton, she'll crush him." The words hit like a fist. Her hands went cold, but then Dalton's fingers wrapped around hers, warm and steady, and he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "Don't listen to her. You're perfect." The vows were a blur. I do. And then the Reverend said, "You may kiss your bride." And Dalton lifted her veil with hands that shook. His eyes searched hers, asking permission, asking forgiveness, asking something she didn't understand yet. When his lips touched hers, soft and brief, she tasted salt. He was crying. Why was he crying? He pulled back too fast, and she saw it again, that flash of terror before he forced a smile and turned to face the crowd. They erupted in applause, but all Lavinia could think was, he's already regretting this. The wedding supper was a special kind of torture. 17 men crowded around the long dining table, passing platters of venison and potatoes, telling stories that got louder and cruder as the whiskey flowed. Cordelia sat across from Lavinia, her thin lips pressed into a line of disapproval, her eyes cataloging every flaw. Lavinia pushed food around her plate, her corset so tight she couldn't swallow. She hadn't eaten in 3 days, terrified that if she gained even an ounce, Dalton would send her back. Across the table, he caught her eye and mouthed, "You all right?" She nodded, lying. She was drowning. Then Cordelia's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Dalton, darling, do tell everyone how you met your bride." The pause dripped with venom. Lavinia wanted to disappear, but Dalton's jaw clenched, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd built an empire from dust, through correspondence. Lavinia wrote the most intelligent, honest letters I've ever read. She's got more courage in her little finger than most men have in their whole body." The table went quiet. Cordelia's smile faltered. "How modern. Mail-order brides." "What's next?" Women voting. Laughter erupted, mean and sharp, and Lavinia's face burned with shame. But under the table, Dalton's hand found hers and squeezed twice. Their secret signal from his letters. "I see you. You're safe." Her throat tightened with tears. She refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. When the grandfather clock struck 9, the ranch hands began pounding the table and chanting, "To the marriage bed. To the marriage bed." Vinnie's stomach turned to ice. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading. The moment when Dalton would finally see all of her and realize he'd made a terrible mistake. But then he stood, his chair scraping loud against the wood floor, and his voice thundered through the room. "That's enough. My wife and I are retiring. Alone. And if any man here follows us up those stairs, he'll be packing his gear by sunrise." Silence fell, like a hammer. He offered Lavinia his arm, steady and sure, and together they climbed the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. What would happen when they reached the top? What would he expect from her? And why did he look just as terrified as she felt? Dalton closed the bedroom door behind them and leaned against it like it was the only thing holding him upright. The room glowed warm with lamplight, shadows dancing across the four-poster bed draped in quilts his mother had stitched before his father's fists had silenced her forever. Lavinia stood in the center of the room, her massive frame dwarfing the delicate furniture, and she looked like a wild horse trapped in a pen, powerful but terrified of her own strength. She twisted her hands together, her knuckles white. "I should. I brought a nightgown. I'll just—" She gestured toward her trunk, desperate for something to do, somewhere to hide. But Dalton's voice stopped her cold. Lavinia, the way he said her name, soft, careful, like it was something precious, made her freeze. "We don't have to do anything tonight." Her head snapped toward him, confusion flooding her face. "But we're married. It's expected. I know my duty." The word duty hit him like a gut punch. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her, his hands hovering near her arms. "Duty? Is that what you think this is?" Her gray-blue eyes, the color of Wyoming sky before a storm met his, and he saw a lifetime of pain compressed into that single look. "My first husband, Josiah, he." Her voice cracked, and she looked away. "He never made me feel like this was anything but duty. And I'm too much. Too tall, too strong, too—" "Stop." Dalton's command was gentle but firm. "Lavinia, look at me." She did, and her chin trembled. "You're not too much. You're not too anything." He took a shaking breath, and when he spoke again, his voice broke. "The truth is, I'm terrified. Not of you, of myself." Her brow furrowed. She didn't understand. How could this powerful man, who commanded 17 cowboys and owned 10,000 acres, be afraid of anything? Dalton walked to the window, his back to her, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "My father built this ranch with blood and brutality. Every night growing up, I'd hear my mother crying through these walls, begging him to stop, begging him to be gentle." His shoulders shook, and I swore on her grave I'd never touch a woman until I could be certain, absolutely certain I wouldn't become him. The confession hung in the air between them like smoke. Lavinia's breath caught in her throat. "That's why you've never." He turned to face her, and she saw tears streaming down his face, reflecting gold in the lamplight. 41 years old, and I've never touched a woman because I was too afraid of what I might do. Too afraid I'd hurt someone the way he hurt her. Lavinia felt something crack open inside her chest. All this time she'd thought he was disappointed in her, disgusted by her size, regretting his choice. But he was just as broken as she was, just as terrified. She took a step toward him, her long legs closing the distance. "Dalton, you're not your father." Her voice was stronger now, steadier. "I've read every letter you sent me. I've seen how you talk about your horses, your men, this land. You're gentle. You're kind." He shook his head. "You don't know what's in my blood." "Then let me show you what's in mine." She reached up slowly, giving him time to pull away, and placed her large hand against his chest. His heart was hammering like thunder. "I'm afraid too, Josiah. He used to tell me I was a freak, that no real man would want something like me. He'd drink until he couldn't stand, and then She couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Dalton's hand covered hers, pressing it harder against his heart. Did he hurt you? Dalton's voice was dangerous now, protective. Lavinia nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. For 7 years. But the worst part wasn't the bruises. It was how he made me feel small even though I'm this tall, like I was too much and not enough all at the same time. Dalton's jaw clenched so hard she could hear his teeth grind. If he wasn't already dead, I'd kill him myself. The fierce declaration should have scared her, but instead it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a decade safe. I haven't let anyone touch me in 10 years, she whispered. Not since the last time he. I locked myself away, built walls so high I forgot what it felt like to want someone to touch me. But tonight, standing here with you, I'm terrified. Because I do want it. I want you, and I don't know how to do this anymore. Dalton's free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. Then we'll learn together. Slow, careful, and the second you want to stop, we stop. No duty, no expectations. Just us. Lavinia leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. His hand was so warm, so steady. "Am shy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's my first night in 10 years. She opened her eyes and found him staring at her with such tenderness it hurt to breathe. "It's my first time too," he said, and this time there was no fear in his voice. Only wonder, only hope. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. And when his lips met hers this time, it wasn't brief or chaste. It was deep and searching and full of all the loneliness they'd both carried for so long. Lavinia's hands came up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer, and she felt his arms wrap around her waist, strong and sure. For the first time in her life, someone held her like she was delicate, like she was treasure. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. "Neither do I," she laughed, and it sounded like breaking and healing all at once. "But I trust you." Those 4 words, "I trust you," hit Dalton harder than any blow his father had ever landed. She trusted him. This woman who'd been broken and betrayed trusted him with her body, her heart, her healing. He took her hand and led her toward the bed, and she followed without hesitation. But just as they reached it, a sound from outside made them both freeze. Footsteps on the stairs, coming closer.
The footsteps stopped right outside their door. Dalton's whole body went rigid, his protective instincts flaring like wildfire. Lavinia's hand tightened in his, her breath catching. Then came the knock, sharp, impatient, furious. "Dalton." Cordelia's voice sliced through the wood like a blade. "We need to talk. Now." Dalton's jaw clenched so hard, Lavinia thought she heard something crack. He looked at her, his eyes asking permission, asking forgiveness for the interruption. She nodded, stepping back, and he crossed to the door, opening it just wide enough to block his sister's view of the room. "This better be life or death, Cordelia." His voice was granite. Cordelia stood in the hallway, still dressed in her gray traveling suit, her face pinched with disapproval. "I'm leaving at first light. Taking the morning stage back to Denver." She paused and Lavinia could hear the venom building. "But before I go, someone needs to tell you the truth about your bride." Lavinia's blood turned to ice. No, not now. Not when she'd finally started to feel safe. Dalton's shoulders squared. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of my wife." He opened the door wider, and Cordelia's cold eyes found Lavinia standing by the bed. "Fine. Did she tell you about her first husband? About how he died?" Lavinia felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Cordelia, don't," Dalton warned, but his sister talked right over him. "Josiah Blackwood didn't die in a mine collapse like she told everyone. He was found at the bottom of their property well, with his skull cracked open." Cordelia's lips curved into something cruel. "The sheriff ruled it an accident, said he must have stumbled drunk and fallen, but the whole town whispered the truth. That giant wife of his finally had enough and pushed him." The words hit like bullets. Lavinia couldn't breathe. The room spun. That's not... I didn't... But her voice came out broken, unconvincing, and she saw doubt flicker across Dalton's face. Just a flicker, but it was enough. Cordelia pressed her advantage. She came here desperate, brother. A widow with nothing, accused of murder by half of Missouri. You think she wants you? She wants your money, your protection, your name. Dalton turned slowly to look at Lavinia, and she saw the question in his eyes. The terrible, horrible question. Did you kill him? Lavinia's legs gave out and she sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands shaking so violently she had to press them against her thighs. It was an accident. Her voice was barely a whisper. He came home drunk, again, started yelling about how I'd embarrassed him at church because I was taller than him. He grabbed me, tried to... She couldn't finish, couldn't say it out loud. I pushed him away, just pushed him. He stumbled backward toward the well, and I reached for him. I swear I reached for him. But he... The image flashed behind her eyes like it had every night for 3 years. Josiah's arms windmilling, his eyes wide with surprise, the sickening crack when he hit the bottom. You see, Cordelia's voice was triumphant. She's dangerous. Send her back before she... Get out. Dalton's voice was so quiet it was terrifying. What? I said get out of my house. Now. He turned to face his sister, and Lavinia had never seen anyone look so cold. You come into my home on my wedding night, you insult my wife, you throw her trauma in her face like a weapon, and you think I'm going to thank you. Cordelia's mouth fell open. I'm trying to protect you from what? From a woman who defended herself against a violent drunk, from someone who's been carrying guilt for an accident that wasn't her fault. Dalton stepped closer to his sister, his voice rising. You want to talk about dangerous? Our father was dangerous. He beat our mother until she couldn't stand, and you stood by and did nothing. Don't you dare judge Lavinia for surviving. Cordelia's face went white. How dare you? No, how dare you? Dalton pointed toward the stairs. You have until sunrise to get off my land, and if I ever hear you speak about my wife again, you'll find out just how much of our father's blood runs in my veins. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Cordelia's eyes filled with tears, angry, bitter tears. But she turned and swept down the hallway, her footsteps echoing through the house. Dalton slammed the door and locked it. For a long moment, he just stood there, his back to Lavinia, his shoulders heaving. She wanted to speak, to explain, to beg him to believe her, but her throat was closed tight with fear. What if he changed his mind? What if he saw her the way the whole town had, as a monster who'd killed her husband and gotten away with it? Then Dalton turned around, and she saw his face, saw the tears streaming down his cheeks, saw the fury and the tenderness all mixed together. He crossed the room in 4 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her. I'm so sorry. His voice broke. I'm so sorry you had to defend yourself. I'm sorry no one protected you. I'm sorry you've been carrying that guilt. Lavinia stared at him, unable to process what was happening. You believe me? Of course I believe you. He took her trembling hands in his. Lavinia, I know what it's like to live with a violent man. I know what it does to you. How it makes you feel trapped and terrified, and like you're always one wrong word away from pain. He pressed his forehead to her knees. You survived. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of. The dam inside her broke. 10 years of grief and guilt and shame came pouring out in great, shaking sobs. She bent forward, wrapping her arms around Dalton's shoulders, and he held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I didn't mean to, she gasped between sobs. I just wanted him to stop. I just wanted it to stop. I know. Dalton's hands rubbed circles on her back, steady and soothing. It wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault. They stayed like that for what felt like hours, her crying into his shoulder while he whispered reassurances and held her together when she felt like falling apart. Slowly, gradually, the sobs turned to hiccups, then to shaking breaths, then to stillness. When she finally pulled back, her face was swollen and blotchy, her eyes red. "I must look terrible," she tried to laugh. "You look brave," Dalton said, and he meant it. He stood, pulling her up with him, and cupped her face in both hands. "Listen to me. What happened to Josiah was not your fault. You defended yourself. You survived. And I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never have to defend yourself again." Lavinia searched his eyes, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for the flicker of fear she'd seen before. But all she found was certainty, raw, honest certainty. "Why are you so good to me?" she whispered. "Because you deserve goodness." He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, soft and lingering. "And because I think maybe we were both broken in ways that fit together. Maybe we can help each other heal." She closed her eyes, letting his words sink into the wounded places inside her. "I want that. I want to heal. I want to stop being afraid." "Then let's start tonight." Dalton stepped back and began unbuttoning his shirt, slowly, giving her time to object. "No expectations, no pressure. We'll just be together. However that looks." Lavinia's heart hammered in her chest, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from want, from hope, from the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could have this. She reached for the buttons on her dress with shaking fingers. "I'm shy," she whispered again, and this time there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "It's my first night in 10 years. Dalton smiled back, his own fingers fumbling with his belt. "It's my first time too." And when they came together, awkward and uncertain and completely honest, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't like the romance novels Lavinia had read as a girl. But it was real. It was gentle. And for the first time in either of their lives, it was safe. Morning light filtered through the lace curtains, painting golden stripes across the quilted bed where Lavinia lay wrapped in Dalton's arms. She'd never felt so exposed and so safe at the same time. Her head rested on his bare chest, rising and falling with each breath he took, and she could hear his heartbeat. Steady, strong, alive. They'd barely slept. Not because of passion, though there had been that, tender and fumbling and punctuated with nervous laughter when they couldn't figure out how their bodies fit together. But mostly they'd stayed awake talking, really talking. About his mother and her gentle hands. About Josiah's cruelty and the scars that didn't show on skin. About loneliness so deep it felt like drowning. About the terror of hoping when hope had always led to disappointment before. Now, in the quiet dawn, Lavinia traced small circles on Dalton's chest with her fingertip, marveling at the simple permission to touch someone without flinching. "What are you thinking?" His voice was rough with sleep, intimate in a way that made her stomach flutter. She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm thinking about how different this feels from what I expected marriage to be. With Josiah, I spent every morning calculating how to stay small, how to stay quiet, how to survive the day without setting him off." Her fingers stilled. "But right now, lying here with you, I'm not calculating anything. I'm just here." Dalton's arms tightened around her. "Good. That's all I want, for you to just be." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "No more hiding. No more making yourself small." A commotion from outside shattered the peaceful moment. Horses whinnying, men shouting, wagon wheels crunching on gravel. Dalton sat up, instantly alert. That's the morning stage. His jaw tightened. Cordelia's leaving. Lavinia sat up too, pulling the sheet around her shoulders. Part of her felt relief that his sister would be gone, but another part, the part that had been rejected and judged her whole life, felt the familiar sting of not being enough. She hates me. She hates everyone who threatens her control. Dalton swung his legs out of bed and reached for his pants. My sister has spent 20 years trying to run this ranch from Denver, sending letters full of advice I never asked for. You're not the problem. Her inability to let go is. He turned back to Lavinia, his expression softening. But I need to go down there. Make sure she actually leaves and doesn't poison my men's minds against you before she goes. Lavinia's stomach dropped. What if they listen to her? What if they all think I'm a murderer? The old fear came rushing back. The whispers in Missouri. The way people had crossed the street to avoid her. The children who'd pointed and stared. Dalton crossed back to the bed and knelt in front of her, taking her face in his hands the way he had the night before. Then they can find work elsewhere. Any man who disrespects my wife has no place on my land. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her chest ache. But you don't have to hide up here like you've done something wrong. Come down with me. Let them see you standing beside me. Let Cordelia see that she didn't win. Terror and pride warred inside Lavinia. The old her, the woman who'd spent 10 years making herself invisible, wanted to stay hidden until the danger passed. But the new her, the one who'd been held and believed and chosen, wanted to stand tall. She took a deep breath and nodded. Help me with my corset. 20 minutes later, they descended the stairs together, Dalton's hand firm on the small of her back. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the ranch house in warm gold. Through the front door, Lavinia could see the stagecoach waiting in the yard, horses stamping impatiently. Cordelia stood beside it, her bags already loaded, surrounded by several ranch hands. She was talking to them in low, urgent tones, and when she saw Dalton and Lavinia emerge, her face twisted with something ugly. There she is, Cordelia announced loudly. The woman who killed her first husband and trapped my brother into marriage. The ranch hands shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Cordelia and Dalton. Lavinia felt her courage falter, felt the old instinct to apologize, to shrink, to disappear. But Dalton's hand pressed firmer against her back, holding her steady. That's enough, Cordelia. Dalton's voice carried across the yard with authority. You've said your piece. Now get on that stage and don't come back until you can show my wife the respect she deserves. Respect, Cordelia laughed, sharp and bitter. For a murderer, for a woman who's using you. For a survivor. Dalton stepped forward, pulling Lavinia with him. My wife defended herself against a violent drunk who tried to hurt her. The sheriff investigated and ruled it an accident. The only people who questioned that were gossips with nothing better to do than tear down a woman who refused to die quietly. He turned to address the ranch hands directly. Any man here who has a problem with my wife can collect his pay and ride out with my sister. But if you stay, you treat Mrs. Ashford with the same respect you'd show me. She's not just the lady of this house. She's my partner. My equal. Silence fell across the yard. The ranch hands looked at each other, then at Lavinia's towering frame, then back at Dalton. Finally, an older cowboy named Flint stepped forward, his weathered face breaking into a gap-toothed grin. Hell, boss, I've been waiting 20 years for you to find someone tough enough to handle this place. If she survived what your sister's describing, sounds like she's tougher than most men I know. He pulled off his hat and gave Lavinia a respectful nod. Welcome to the Ashford Ranch, ma'am. You need anything, you just holler. One by one, the other ranch hands followed suit, removing their hats, nodding, murmuring their welcomes. Some looked uncomfortable, sure, but none of them left. None of them sided with Cordelia. Lavinia felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking this time, but blooming. These rough men with their calloused hands and sun-weathered faces were choosing to see her as human, as worthy, as belonging. Cordelia's face flushed crimson with rage and humiliation. "You're all fools. She'll destroy him just like she destroyed Josiah." "No." Lavinia's voice rang out clear and strong, surprising even herself. She stepped forward, standing to her full height, no longer trying to make herself smaller. "Josiah destroyed himself with whiskey and violence. I just refused to let him destroy me too." She met Cordelia's eyes directly. "I didn't come here to trap your brother. I came here because I was desperate and alone and answered an advertisement. But I'm staying because he's shown me what it means to be treated with kindness, with respect, with love." The word love hung in the morning air like a benediction. Dalton's hand found hers and squeezed, not their secret signal this time, but something new, something that said, "I'm here. I'm staying. We're in this together." Cordelia opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, she had nothing to say. She turned sharply and climbed into the stagecoach, slamming the door behind her. The driver cracked his whip, and the horses lurched forward, carrying her down the long drive toward the main road. Lavinia watched until the coach disappeared into the morning haze, and with it, the last shadow of her old life seemed to fade. She was free. Not just from Josiah, not just from Missouri, but from the belief that she had to apologize for existing. Dalton pulled her close, right there in front of all his men, and kissed her like they weren't being watched. When he pulled back, his eyes were shining. "I love you too, in case that wasn't clear." Lavinia laughed, a real laugh, full of joy and disbelief and overwhelming relief. "After one night? After reading 50 letters where you showed me your soul?" He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "After watching you face down the thing you feared most and come out stronger? After feeling what it's like to be seen by someone who understands what it means to be broken?" He grinned. "Yeah, after all that, I'm pretty sure. Then I guess we're both crazy." She leaned her forehead against his. "Because I love you too, even though you snore." "I do not. You absolutely do." The ranch hands erupted in laughter and applause, breaking the intimate moment, but somehow making it better. Flint hollered, "Well, don't just stand there, boss. We got cattle to move and a ranch to run. Honeymoon's over." Dalton laughed and waved them off. "Give us one more day, you old buzzard." As the men dispersed, still chuckling and shaking their heads, Lavinia felt something she'd never felt before. Possibility. The kind that stretched out like the Wyoming plains, vast and golden and full of promise. "What do we do now?" she asked. Dalton considered, then a mischievous glint entered his eyes. "Well, we could go back upstairs, practice some more of that fumbling around we did last night." Lavinia's cheeks flushed. Or I could show you the ranch. Really show you. The places I go when I need to remember why I built all this." He pulled her toward the stable. "There's a canyon about an hour's ride from here, where the wildflowers grow so thick you can't see the ground. I've never taken anyone there." They saddled 2 horses, his a massive black stallion named Goliath, hers a gentle mare named Prudence, who didn't shy away from Lavinia's size. As they rode out across the open range, the morning sun climbing higher, Lavinia felt the wind in her hair and Dalton's presence beside her, and thought about the strange mathematics of healing. How 2 broken people didn't make a whole person. They made something entirely new, something stronger than either could have been alone. When they reached the canyon, it was exactly as beautiful as he'd promised. Wildflowers in purple and yellow and red carpeted the ground, and the morning light turned everything golden. Dalton helped her down from her horse, and they stood there, surrounded by all that wild beauty, and he said, "This is what I wanted to show you. This is what starting over looks like." Lavinia looked at the flowers pushing up through hard Wyoming soil, thriving despite the harsh conditions, and she understood. She took his hand and laced their fingers together. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me when I'd given up on being seen, for believing me when no one else did, for showing me that first times can be beautiful. Even when you're 41 and 34 and have no idea what you're doing." She smiled. "For giving me a reason to stop being shy." Dalton pulled her close, and there in that secret canyon with the wildflowers as their only witnesses, he kissed her like they had all the time in the world. And maybe they did. Maybe that was the gift of starting over. Not perfection, not ease, but time. Time to learn each other. Time to heal. Time to build something neither of them had ever dared to hope for. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and grinning, Lavinia looked out across the ranch, her ranch now, and felt something powerful settle into her bones. She'd spent 10 years believing she was too much for anyone to love. But standing here with Dalton, she finally understood the truth. She wasn't too much. She'd just been with people who were too small. And now, for the first time in her life, she had someone big enough to stand beside her, someone brave enough to say, "It's my first time too," and mean it. Someone who saw her scars and her strength and loved her for both. The giant widow and the virgin rancher. Two impossible people who'd found each other against all odds. And their story, awkward and honest and completely beautifully real, was just beginning.
Once again, Tales from the Wild West sends a huge thank you to all of you. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep creating. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.